Remote is on a mission to create opportunity everywhere by making it simple for companies to find, hire, manage, and pay teams anywhere. Founded in 2019 by Job van der Voort and Marcelo Labra, Remote combines deep local expertise with a unified HR and payroll platform built for compliance, security, and ease of use. Remote's all-in-one solution enables organizations to onboard international employees and contractors without needing to establish local entities, simplifying global expansion. Remote combines payroll, benefits, compliance, and HR management into a single platform, giving businesses greater control and visibility across their workforce. With a strong focus on compliance and employee experience, it supports organizations in navigating complex local regulations while ensuring timely, accurate payments. For growing businesses, Remote provides a scalable way to build and manage distributed teams with confidence. Remote is backed by leading investors including SoftBank, Excel, Sequoia, Index Ventures, Two Sigma Ventures, General Catalyst, and B Capital. Find out more at remote.com.
Welcome everybody to what promises to be a very interesting discussion today. It's a pleasure to have all of you from wherever it is you might be joining us, wherever it is you might be watching or listening to this. Very, very happy to have this discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is very key. We like to coin it, or we have coined it, the confidence gap. And it is about why payroll accuracy is now a retention problem. And by retention, we don't mean memory. We mean in terms of keeping your people engaged, keeping them within the organization. And today, I want to start with a particular number. I want everyone listening to hold this number in their mind, 64%, right? That is the number I want to start with. Now, that's the share of U.S. employees who say they would consider leaving their job if their pay concerns remain or stay unaddressed. It's a very key number. It's something that I want us to focus on. We ran a global survey across 6,000 respondents across 7 different countries. And the feedback we got is that that number in itself is very key. And there are lots of people who would say, if things remain as they were in terms of their pay, they will leave their current job. Now, this number, it's huge, it's key, and we're going to talk a lot about it. But before we get back into all of those details, we have 2 wonderful people who are here with me to dissect all of this. Barry, John, I'm going to pass it to you for some introductions.
Kelvin, thank you very much. Name is Barry Flanagan. I'm VP of Payroll, go-to-market here at Remote. Essentially, I spend my days talking to companies about their payroll, what's working, what's broken, how we can help, what's keeping their CEO up at night. So I hear the buying side of that pretty much every day.
And John?
Great. I'm John Papagiannis. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Kelvin. Thanks, Barry. I'm the general manager here at Remote. I focus on U.S. payroll and PEO. Basically, what that means is I'm the jack of all trades, leading our operations for PEO and payroll, focused on the U.S. market. Barry sells those promises with his team, and my team delivers the reality of that in that way. That encompasses multi-state compliance, tax registrations, workers' comp benefits, really making sure and ensuring that folks are paid correctly and on time, as that's one of those things that helps build that trust.
And if I oversell, then you're the one who calls me on it. So
not often, but we do work together hand in hand to just make sure that we're over-delivering wherever we possibly can.
Absolutely.
Great. So I think we have 2 perfect people. We have, the person who here's what companies want. Barry, you sit with those CEOs, basically what they're looking for. And then we have John, who basically knows what it actually takes to bring that to life and make things happen. So great personnel to different sides of the pool. Right. So let's start with that whole number. Let's start with what I like to call the satisfaction gap, right? And this isn't going into the weeds, but it's generally a human problem. So in that same report, that same survey that we ran that I mentioned previously, a large number, I think it was about 77% of people in the US, Barry, they say that they are satisfied with their pay currently. They're okay with it, nothing wrong with it. But that sounds great on paper. It sounds great when you hear it. But when you dig deeper, you find that 25% of that number, they would need to make major financial changes or cutbacks if, for any reason, the pay remains like that. And then 18% of them say they will struggle if things just keep remaining that way. They will struggle to afford their essentials. considering that's a high number, why do we think that is? What is actually going on?
So it's a great question. And I think really when you do consider that relatively high number in respect of pay satisfaction, that's quite an immediate viewpoint that I think a lot of the employees have. They can look around and they've got a lot of comparative tools available to them and quite a lot of transparency and openness in the marketplace about what pay is available. So they're quite easily able to see where they sit in comparison to peers from other organizations. That's probably why that level is quite high, because US organizations tend to have a huge amount of competition, war for talent, and if you fall behind in that, if your rates are not at the correct level, well, then you're not going to be able to attract the people in the first place. But it does point to another very, very, from my outside perspective, quite an American phenomenon, which is the phenomenon of living paycheck to paycheck as well. And that does affect a sizable subset of that. 25%, as you mentioned, would need to make major financial cutbacks if their career does not progress. 18% saying that they're going to struggle to afford essentials. So that's not pay satisfaction. That's people holding on. That's people living quite short term. And that gap between I'm okay now and I can see that my pay is relatively speaking in comparative to my peers reasonable, is a gap between that and I'm worried about next year's pay. And that gap is where you lose people as well.
Yeah, I mean, oh, please go ahead. Yeah. Just to add from the operations side, I mean, that's what it is, though. It's, these employees are there to work. They're there to focus on their day-to-day. Any of these issues are like silent issues that can compound over time where it eludes or erodes the trust that they're building with their company and with their overall job. And that's what it is. It's like you're satisfied with your job overall, the environment, what you're being paid. But ultimately, like you look at your payroll and you're missing an error due to a withholding issue. Whether it's something of like a human error on your side or the payroll processor didn't process correctly, there's a benefit deduction that doesn't look quite right, whether it's like from the employer contribution or what employees are adding from their own side. These are material impacts to them as employees holistically, but also to their families that they might be supporting. And so every little notch on that is like something that unfortunately evaporates the satisfaction overall. And then as that happens, you yourself as the employer or the admin kind of look at this in this perspective, and you are then questioning who you're with and like how you're running it. So it's an employee problem that then can escalate and compound in that way.
And I can even just relate. I mean, we're talking about percentages, we're talking about numbers, but if we bring it out to ourselves, like I can relate with that myself. If my pay just remains as it is and my lifestyle changes, or probably there's a new addition to my family, there will always be things that will draw on that, right? So you're never basically in the same place, irrespective of whatever you're earning. So we can generally say like that satisfaction is fleeting, right? It depends on where you are at that time, right? Okay, good. Well, when you hear about those things, are there any things that, payroll teams should take into consideration concerning this reality, right? If people are where they are now, things are going to change. Is there anything that can be done around that from a payroll point of view?
Well, I think that a key word that John mentioned there, which is a word that I think will crop up time and time again in this discussion, is trust. And so you have to ensure that where there is that fragility, that level on that potential gap between I'm okay now, but where am I going to be next year? You need your employee to have trust in the fact that you are going to be able to pay them accurately. You are going to be able to pay them on time. You're not going to erode trust with any of these material errors that can really, really destroy what is the fundamental bond between employee and employer. Much and all as we love to think that it is the perks, much and all as we love to think that it is the brand that they are attracted to and feel a loyalty to, it is the paycheck at the end of the day is the essential component in that. And speaking of those types of perks that might be available, wellness stipends, home office budgets, learning allowances, there's an awful lot of additional extras, which are often very valuable and which are often valued by the employees, but none of that matters in comparison to the timeliness and accuracy, the two key metrics that any buyer who's going to be coming to us is going to interrogate us about. What's your accuracy rate? What's your timeliness rate? Are they best leading in market? Because they understand and they know that the perks, the additional extras that you can use to possibly slightly differentiate your offer actually paling to insignificance in comparison to timeliness and accuracy. And just a couple of stats that we had at our that recent survey that you mentioned at the intro, the payroll report that we did for 2026, 43% of employees rank fast and timely payments as the number one issue for them when it comes to payroll, and 33% ranked accuracy. So you're already over 3/4 of your employees timeliness and accuracy. That's what they want, and that's what they need to deliver. They are table stakes, and unfortunately, what we see far too often when we have people coming to us is that their existing provider or their internal function is dropping the ball too often, and they need rectification because they can see the downstream impact of that and the impact it has on the relationship between employee and employer.
Yeah, and I'd love to just add on that. I think, Barry, you hit it very much on the head there. And just bluntly, like, again, like, employees, they know when their paycheck hits. It typically hits in the morning before 12 noon. If it's late in that way, it's one of those things that's just like you start to panic, because it also depends on the time of the month, but we all have different bills at different times. And like, I just want to take a step back and kind of look at like what Remote is doing. Like, we are a torchbearer of like leading this trust and efficiency, because ultimately, Barry, you also kind of mentioned as well, is like folks just don't have the time to go and dig into these issues. They really are relying on us to pay them timely, accurately, and like we are focused on doing smart automations and like enabling folks and employees and clients on both sides in different ways of using AI and bot deflection, and just trying to connect the issues to a faster solution. With the PEO model that we have as a co-employer, like, it's not just reflective now on the client and the employee. We actually take some legal ownership in this as the co-employer. That error compounds to us with tax liabilities to our licenses and so on. So we really are pivotally directionally focused and just ensuring that things are processed on time and accurately. Again, the employee doesn't think about the PO messed up. They think about their employer messed up. So we have that double fold there just to make sure that their business and themselves are represented, and we're continuing that trust with our clients and their employees.
Absolutely, and where that trust gets broken, the cost of that compounds extremely quickly, because then you can be potentially into an offboarding situation, which carries a cost, recruitment, and we know that the average cost or the replacement for a mid-level role typically would run about 60% of the annual salary. So if that's originating from something as fundamental and something as solvable as a payroll error or wrongful deduction, that's an extremely high price to pay. We, of course, as legal employer and a co-employer in this PEO relationship, we bear a huge amount of responsibility, and therefore we have to take that extremely seriously, and we have to deliver at the highest levels in order to ensure that that trust is retained. We don't have a service otherwise. So the ROI on fixing the infrastructure is actually quite immediate, and it will give back to the company. You'll be able to see results on that pretty quickly. That is one of the arguments that I've made to CFOs quite regularly, and it is one that really, really lands.
Okay. Right. Now, so, Mary John, let me bring it back to me. Right. As an employee, my salary has remained the same. I've, raised complaints. Nothing has changed. The company is silent on that. Let's talk about what happens in that kind of scenario, right? When things actually do go wrong, employees are unhappy about salary rates or how things are working. Companies don't respond. In that survey that we launched, our global payroll survey last year, it was early this year, 2026, 56%, and this is another very interesting statistic, of employees globally, 56%, they said they would consider leaving a company if their pay concerns went unaddressed, right? In the US, that number is as high as 64%. That number that I quoted at the beginning, right? It's the highest ever in our survey, right? People are saying, if nothing happens, I will consider leaving. What do you both make of that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's not just a US problem, but a global problem. Employees expect responsiveness, timely. They don't want to be waiting for an answer and a response, again, because there's material impact, or they just don't have the information to connect the dots to ensure that there is no issue. And it is like that. Oftentimes, like tax issues and withholdings, they don't understand like how a wage bracket kind of increases the tax liabilities. So rather than leaving folks to wonder, or employees or clients, like, it really is us, again, at Remote, or just any payroll provider, to keep bridging that trust and making sure that we're having timely responses. Because ultimately, if there's a delay in 3 days, anything outside of an SLA or even a week, or you just forget about the case, that as an employer or even myself, I would feel like, does anyone actually care about me, from my company included, not just the payroll provider?
And I think it's a really good point that you make, John, about globally. It's not just a US issue, it's a global issue. And in fact, the EU has introduced a Pay Transparency Act, which has to come into effect this year, which means that employers are actually legally required to give this information to their employees to respond to their queries in a timely manner. Now, that isn't quite the same in the US yet. It's potentially going to come in further down the line. But what you do have is you have a cultural shift over the last especially 10, 15 years, which we see then manifest in a generational dynamite between the older generation and the younger generation. And the absolute way that this is manifesting now is that figure of 64% that you gave, Kelvin, that's actually 70% when you look at the 16 to 24-year-old cohort. So these are people who are used to living their lives in public, effectively, on social media. They have access to Glassdoor. They have access to Reddit. Salaries, perks, everything gets openly discussed now in a way that it did not get discussed X number of years ago. There are, union power, and the fact that that is dissipated so much means that the structures that were in place and the certainty around moving from level to level and increase to increase and 2% annual increases being standard, that's all gone because there is such a war for talent, because remote work has been enabled, because you can now hire people anywhere. So all of that is compounding again to make this at-risk cohort, your 16 to 24-year-old cohort, the ones who will move on very, very quickly. And 70%, as we said, would consider leaving if they don't have responsiveness. That drops to 41% to my generation, the older generation, who are between the 45 to 55-year-old group. It's still a significant percentage of the workforce, but it is a far lower figure, and that generational shift is one that companies really, really need to be alert to, because these are your younger workers. These are the ones who you're hoping to turn into longer term workers to have with you for a long period of time.
That's so true, Barry, because when you think about it, that age range, 16 to 24, is the range where most companies are actually trying to hire right now. And if a lot of them are saying, hey, if my pay concerns aren't addressed, I'm going to leave, that creates a huge thing to think about, right? So what's the general implication of that from a point of you need to cater to these people? They're the ones you're really trying to hire now, but how do you ensure that your company keeps them happy and keeps bringing them in?
Yeah, I'd love to just jump in here. I mean, it really means from an operational standpoint, like the response times matters. Do you have a triage process in place? Are you increasing the visibility from the actual admin side internally to the admin side externally to understand that things are being worked timely? Again, like we talked about it earlier, it's the erosion of trust. If folks or individuals are not being responded to timely, they think that they don't care, that we as the payroll company don't care and their company doesn't care. And so ultimately, like, there's those thoughts that happen to us silently that we don't communicate to others, but is my job really worth it at this point? If I'm having a hard time, I love what I do, but I'm not being paid, I'm being materially impacted on these other things. And so, really just focusing on our side to make sure that those thoughts don't come into play. And that's with, having tickets and processes that are, smart in their own ways. We have alerts, we have auto routing and, people just engaged on it daily, so there is no surprises in that way on both sides. From my perspective, and this might be me speaking as a millennial, not looking at labels, but honestly, like a query from like a 23-year-old to like a 53-year-old, it's not going to quite matter in terms of urgency. They're both problems. They're different issues maybe being discussed, but it is the same resolution, trying to provide guidance and making sure that things are accurate, or at least there is a baseline of understanding of what took place so that it is accurate in their understanding.
And that's why those two metrics that I mentioned at the start of the discussion in respect of payroll timeliness and accuracy, they're still gold standards, but they are being joined now by a third metric that is becoming increasingly important, which is responsiveness. And if your payroll team is set up from an accuracy and timeliness perspective, and that's what you're monitoring, but you're not monitoring responsiveness as well, well, then you potentially have a gap, unless, of course, those first two metrics are absolutely perfect and you've never any issues, in which case you never have any questions. But we know that that's just not the reality that most people are facing on a day-to-day basis. So you do need to consider as well, how are you tracking? How fast did you respond to that employee who flagged a deduction issue? Did you need to get proactive comms out to any other cohort within the company who may similarly be affected? How many people, in the last quarter who left was payroll error a contributing factor to their departure? So the data isn't always connected. And this is where obviously recent advances in AI, and when you have an AI-focused partner that can enable these types of queries, it does allow you to become much more forward-looking, much more forward-oriented, and so you can tackle these problems head-on and before that they arise as well, which is a really, really key, important component of ensuring that you retain that trust by ensuring that your responsiveness and your proactivity is there as well.
Yeah. I don't think it could have been said better, Barry. Those two words, responsiveness and proactiveness, very key, especially for that generation. We're such a fast generation. If you get stuff that is you're not happy about, you go on social media, you rant, you go to your friends, you vent. So responsiveness is very key to keeping people, employees of both ages at the end of the day, very, very engaged and happy. Right. So I want to move a bit, John, to your particular area of expertise. You did introduce yourself. Of course, you're into PEO and all of that. And I want to talk about that model a little bit because you did mention it, right? So for companies scaling their U.S. workforce through either EOR or PEO, what's the difference? What's different about the payroll challenge that they may face?
Yeah, I mean, everything there is just higher stakes. You're moving from an EOR where we remote are the employee of record. Now the client themselves is saying, we have an entity, we want to establish ourselves and really get our foot in the door with the US. And so they're coming to remote PEO for us to be, their legal co-employer. The PEO in itself, when we're reporting payroll, our name is on the line for their payroll stubs. Benefits are being co-administered through us. We're giving access to a richer suite of benefits. We're giving stepping stones for the client to grow their business in the US. W-2s are generated from remote PEO. And for that, like holistically in itself, because it's all centralized, payroll is the rock foundation for PEO in general. And we are the experience for these employees and for these employers. So there really is no buffer in this.
From the buyer side, the first concern that I hear from companies evaluating PEO and other providers is, well, if I hand my people to you, will they be paid correctly? Will they be paid on time in every state? Typically, they're not asking about the UI. Of course, that comes further down the line. Of course, they're interested in a great experience from that perspective too, and is it intuitive, and what functionality is there? But they are asking fundamentally whether their employees can trust this arrangement. And they're the fundamental metrics that we do go to market with, and that we do ensure are kept at the very highest standards and at the highest rates that we can, because that is fundamentally what everybody is trusting us with. Are you going to ensure that we can keep our people and that they can keep their trust in you and their trust in your responsiveness, in your accuracy, in your timeliness?
Got it.
No, yeah.
John, do you want to add anything on top of that?
Yeah, I was going to just say, like, ultimately too, like multi-state adds like a whole layer of complexity. We are a remote workforce, but some folks still have a brick and mortar, or they work from different locations. Reciprocity comes into play. I'm living in New Jersey, I work out of New York, or vice versa. There's all these just things that not everyone knows about, but you expect your payroll provider or your PEO to provide this in that way. You've got different withholding requirements. You've got different unemployment insurance rules, different local taxes. Employees are moving, mid-cycle of pay period, and their payroll in itself, or their pay slip, is going to materially change from those changes. And if that update doesn't happen cleanly, then the employee gets a wrong pay slip, and then back to our conversation of trust, that erosion is there. They're already, life is stressful. They're already working very hard. They're going through a move. They're going through a change, whatever the reason may be. And we manage this across all 50 states. The margin for error for us is 0, and we just take it very seriously in that way.
Yeah, and employees rank payment security as a top priority. There's a data security angle on this. They want to know that their data is safe. They want to know that it's very well protected. And especially when it's being run through a third party, they need to be able to trust their financial personal data is protected, is secure. It's not a feature, it's a baseline requirement from any employee.
Great, good. For those, if you're really probably just joining us for whatever reason, we've been talking about why, payroll accuracy is actually becoming a retention problem. We've touched on different statistics around young people, around different generations, and how they respond to their payroll needs and their payments. All of this, most of what we're talking about today, you can find in our global payroll report for 2026, which is the basis of where we're getting most of our survey data. We did talk to over 6,000 people across 7 countries, and we put all that data together, and we're actually dissecting all of that for you today. Right. So, John, Barry, we've talked a lot about what's breaking today, right? We've talked about where we are, and I want us to pivot a bit to what is coming, because, the expectation that your payroll team is managing right now, let's say it's on the floor. Let's say that there are little or no expectations. And this is not the ceiling of where we want to go to, right? Our report basically asks employees what payment methods they would want to see in the future, right? We know how the world is changing. Everything is going online. We're already seeing a generation where they want everything fast, right? Fast food, fast cars, all of those things. And so we wanted to find out what options or what would they want to see, going forward. And the answer tells you exactly where retention risk might exist, right? I'll break it down for you. 38%, right, of our survey respondents say they want instant payments, right? 38%. 29% of them say they want automated split deposits, right? 26% say they want payments direct to digital wallets. And then 18% of US employees said they would like to use crypto-based pay, right? Higher than the 11% global average. What does this mean for payroll teams? Are we even ready to cater to these kind of requests, or are we still far off?
I think that the huge amount of information that they have and the huge amount of hype that is there, in particular about crypto, but also backed up a little bit by methodologies like Venmo and Zelle, which are much more instant in terms of clearance, in terms of satisfaction, means that the expectations that people have are accelerating a lot faster than the company's payment infrastructure can keep up. So where you do have the ability to immediately settle up a bill when you're out with a bunch of friends for some pizza, beers, etc., and you can literally do it in seconds, it's therefore much harder to reconcile. Well, why is it that, I've been told that there's a delay to my payment and I'm going to have to wait to see if the recipient bank, if my own bank is going to clear this payment tomorrow. And, I don't understand. Why is there, why is this just not instantaneous as it is, for the settlements that I can make with my friends for much smaller amounts, which don't carry transaction fees. And then of course you're hearing constantly about crypto. So that expectation gap is very real. And it is something that companies do need to be extremely aware of. And it is something that in the war for talent, that companies are making a strategic decision to ensure that they do have faster settlement methodologies in place and do have faster routes available, because they understand that the ability to draw down and the ability to settle payments quicker and on a more frequent basis is going to become one that becomes a hard currency in terms of the war for talent. So that differentiation and that talent acquisition argument is one that now gets made as frequently as the talent retention argument. It's becoming a sword, not a shield, in terms of retention, but also acquisition. And the more mature and instantaneous your settlement mechanism is, the better you are positioned in that respect.
Got it. Barry, John, you want to add on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it a really exciting time for an operations standpoint, and not just exciting, but also just kind of looking at the complexity of it in that way, finding different solutions. Instant payments need real-time processing infrastructure, split deposits need configurable routing. When we look at crypto, there is just so many different layers of regulatory that go into it. There's the tax treatment, there's reporting requirements, even volatility management of it. It's not just like a switch that you flip overnight. And then there is also complexities when you look at a different product of things. And so it is a really interesting standpoint today, just like looking at that complexity and seeing where we can find the middle ground solution or the expedited path to get there to support the requests of these individuals.
And just on crypto, one of the trends that we're seeing at present is much more consolidation around stablecoin as opposed to any token based. And part of that is because, of course, of that volatility in terms of the token values. You know, you're settling on day X and then on day Y when the payment is actually made, there's been a variation. So a lot of companies have who experimented with that have moved away from that. They have the other issue, of course, of occasionally their employees were just calling in rich because the token itself had appreciated in value hugely overnight. So it is really, really focused around stablecoin. So when people, talk about crypto, they do need to be clear about which aspect of it they're talking to in terms of in terms of the trends that we're seeing. And centralization around stablecoin from a settlement perspective is what is really, really trending now, as opposed to any of the more token-based compensation plans that may have been there that just really proved a little bit unworkable due in particular to that volatility as well.
I mean, just to chime in really quickly, I mean, it's the same thing with digital wallets. And you need an integration with payroll systems that most providers just don't provide.
So it basically just feels like there's a huge technological investment or somewhat like infrastructure that needs to be put in place for all these expectations to be met. But do you think, are we far from that happening, or are we closer to it happening?
I think when you look at different things, some are closer than others. I think the smart approach is just offering choices within the compliant guardrails and helping to understand. And if you don't offer something, I think it's always best to pad the no and set the proper expectations in that way. But, employees, admins, they just want predictability. They want a payroll system that has to serve both without introducing risk. It's an architecture challenge. It's looking at flexibility without fragility. So it's finding that middle ground and making sure that you are approaching things in the best way. Remote does this in a great way, where we focus on compliance first and making sure that we're expanding that breadth of nature.
So basically, summary, the bar is rising. Employees want faster, more flexible, more transparent payroll, and they'll leave if they don't get it, right? Right. Good.
Exactly.
And within remote, obviously, we're able to provide all of those resources, all of those solutions, and basically we know how to make things work. Right. Okay. So there are a couple of questions, Barry and John, that have come in. I mean, we've covered a lot from where we started, right? And there's plenty more to unpack. But I want to touch on these questions that we were able to source before this session and, get your experts' opinions on them. I'll ask a few of the most common ones and you both share your perspectives around them, right? Of course, there is no right or wrong answer. You're the experts. Just let us know. So the first one says, how do you evaluate a PEO provider's payroll reliability before you come in? John, I think this should be up your alley.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's assessing the PEO payroll provider and understanding what their capabilities are, what they're offering in terms of pay frequency, what are their check dates that are available to you. Is there any ability to change that? And really looking at it for the reason of if some providers provide fixed dates, there is reasons for that to help maintain that compliance and set you as an employer up for success. Even if with your employees, and that just sets, again, more reliability. So really assessing it from that lens, if there is customization, understanding that adds complexities, but also if there is no customization, there is reason and valid understanding behind that. And setting that predictable nature is what we talked about earlier, is just having that trust and foundation for that. So I would say to look at it from that lens.
Good. Barry, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that was a perfect answer. I think that really summed up exactly what it is that the buyers are looking for, the lens through which they're going to consider this, and the key important parts of it. So yeah, absolutely. Just to echo what John has said.
Okay, good. And so I know, John, you talked about the different states, like in the US, for example, right? There's always that concern about different laws, different things that apply. So this question, I think, fits that, and it's both for you, Barry, as well. It says, what happens when an employee moves states mid-year, right? how does the tax profile update? So for example, you're moving from a state, maybe, from Texas to, another state, like how does that work?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, you look at it from the federal, state, and local level. If you are living in Florida, you don't have state income tax, but then you move to New York where you do have state income tax, or you move to Ohio or Pennsylvania where you then have state income tax plus a slew of local taxes. Depending on what state, you can be, necessary to pay one and not the other. And so really from us as a provider, just in general, like that does change in terms of like what is the base pay that someone is taking, also like what they're contributing in terms of W-4 elections. Us as a payroll provider, right, we also have to then take into consideration, and not just consideration, make sure that we are also processing wage-based limits, because this is more applicable to unemployment, but each state has its own wage-based threshold where someone is contributing, and like having that understanding of like what happens and what changes, because it will materially impact pay. And the employee, again, doesn't always need to know like why their pay is changing, but making it accessible for them to understand the why as it's happening is something that is a superpower of us.
And that's absolutely key to building that trust and retaining that trust, is the understanding of why, the additional detail. There is, of course, a little bit of flexibility, much more so in the US than there would be in other jurisdictions in terms of the election of those withholdings, the W4 withholdings that John mentioned as well. That often creates quite a strange situation when you look at it from a global perspective, which is that the employee can be left in a refund position and can be looking forward to a rebate check that comes in, and towards the end of April, having filed their taxes. That's not the global standard at all, and it is just something to bear in mind that while that is often a choice that is made by the individual, it remains their choice. The opposite to that, which is where they file a return and they suddenly determine that they have a shortfall because, just to use the states that you both mentioned, Texas and Florida, if you leave either of those two, no state income tax jurisdictions, then you go to a state that does have a state income tax, you really do not want to be left in a position where you have a payment to make at year end, potential penalty or anything like that, which is why that accuracy from that perspective is so important, and ensuring that you do have a multi-state solution in place that takes that into account.
Got it. Okay. Barry, this one I think is for you, right? It says, what's the real cost of a payroll error in terms of employee trust and retention?
Varies a little bit jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but in general, what we're seeing is roughly 45 to 50% of employees would leave or consider leaving an employer after the second payroll error. So it's an incredibly real cost in terms of retention. Just under 50% of your workforce is at risk if there are frequent payroll errors. Obviously, you've got the loss of key knowledge that is walking out the door with an employee who elects to take that ultimate action, and then the very real cost of replacing that person. But again, the less quantifiable costs, do manifest in respect of the trust levels that your remaining employees have, because people talk and people understand. And if there's constant issues and constant errors, well, then people won't tolerate that and they will walk. And even the people who remain, their trust levels again are impacted as well. So ensuring that you have the accuracy and timeliness, the table stakes are just incredibly important. There's costs from both a quantifiable and also a more abstract way level as well.
John, let me come back to you with a question on managing payroll across different states, but this time for a mix of employees and contractors, right? Because the most common one is probably you're handling just for employees, but now you're doing for both. What does that look like? How do you handle that? How does remote help to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to look at it from the remote perspective, and like, what is our like number one thing that, clients and new companies come to us for, is for being a global consolidator across the board, not just for, US pay or global pay, but also for contractor management. And so, in that way, it's like living under one system and making sure that each employee is paid respectively to their payroll, and that there is like an ease and mechanism there to support those, like support the quicker processing and the accurate processing. Thankfully, the contractors, I mean, it really is like they have a flat amount. They are either billing that or they're being paid that on a term. And so that makes it much easier. And remote is great at being able to process that in an effective manner as well.
Got it. Right. Two more questions and then we'll be out of here. Larry, I think I can shoot this one your way. We did talk about it a bit. You touched on it when we were talking about, different types of pay and what people expect. The question is instant pay or earned wages, is it realistic for most companies right now?
I think it's becoming a reality, and I think it's becoming something that companies are really going to want to ensure that they are keeping abreast of, that they are aware of where this is available in the market. Typically, in order to achieve the holy grail of instant pay, you're going to have to ensure that your data layer is secure, is accurate, and contains only structured data. When you do have that in place, what you can then do is you can run your computational engine on top of that extremely well and extremely efficiently, which does open up the prospect in the not too distant future of instant pay. So it isn't a reality today for a lot of companies because of the way that they are set up. They've got disparate providers. They may be using a different time and attendance function, a different HRIS, a different payroll solution. Where that is the case, then instant pay is not going to be realistic for them. But where they have unified those three aspects and elements and do have a structured data layer, then that becomes a reality. And that is going to become an incredibly important offensive weapon in the war for talent going forward. So that's really something that companies do need to be aware of. Now that we do potentially have instantaneous settlement via stablecoin, instantaneous processing is going to be tackled next, and that will allow the future is very it's super interesting to see what's going to happen in the next coming years. Is it effectively going to get to a situation where we have payroll on demand, that employees can draw down, they could choose to draw down on a daily basis, for example, and can do so in a compliant and accurate manner with just filings being made periodically by the employer thereafter. So it is something that people really, really need to be aware of, because the landscape is shifting so quickly, and you don't want your competitive advantage eroded in this respect, which it could be if you're not aware of what the latest trends are.
I think that's very well said. Times are changing. You need to step up your infrastructure. You need to keep ahead of the needs of your potential employees and all of those things. Now, for those who might have been listening, Barry, John, especially because we've talked about where we are, we've talked about what is changing. And for some people, they're like, oh, all this is great. I've heard all about this. But how do I build a business case, for my CFO, or, for those who make these decisions about investing in payroll infrastructure? We're not at the place where we need instant pay yet, but we see the importance of it. Like, it's something we need to have. So for those people who are listening or watching this and are asking that question, how do they build that case? What do they need to say? What do they need to have to get their leaders to buy into, building, this infrastructure? What do they need to know? Is it already available? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd love to just jump in here. Honestly, I think the best way to build a case is to sell value, and ultimately looking at value in this perspective is what is the cost of keeping things the way that we are now? Processing things by hand, or either doing it through an Excel spreadsheet and just managing your own payment files in that way. You want to look at a payroll provider to help offload and offset some of that responsibility that's on your plate. That's ultimately what businesses and what remote looks to do for anyone looking for administrative payroll or a payroll provider, is helping them to breathe easier, to be able to process and focus on all the other things that they're managing on their plate. So I think that really is the business case is hey, we're doing it this way. If we do it this way, it's going to save this time, which means this much value. And also, in the terms of that being global payroll, but also looking at PEO, it's hey, we don't have access to benefits, and we are not offering this. Countless times we've now been asked for these, for health insurance or dental insurance, for fertility benefits, and not offering that is also blocking individuals from retaining or even acquiring that new pool of talent.
Anything
Cost and value. Yeah.
Nothing from you, Barry? I don't know if Barry can hear us.
Sorry, apologies. Yep, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Sorry. Do you want to repeat the question again? Sorry.
No, I was saying, you want to add to anything to what John has said in terms of, building that case for
yeah, I'll just go again. So in respect of building the case, then it is just important, as John said, to be cognizant of all of the different potential inputs into that business case. That you are looking at both the soft cost and the hard cost, the quantifiable metrics, but also the impact on trust. And it is important to ensure that you are making that link between the direct costs that you have associated with simple payroll provision, and then the indirect costs that you have, and that can be managed thereafter when you have more accurate and more timely metrics and more timeliness achieved in that respect. So just to be aware of all of the different inputs into that case, that business case that you're building. It's not just the simple direct cost of, well, we have a payroll processor who costs us X amount. It goes far beyond that and does involve a lot more stakeholders to that because of the different impacts it can have.
Got it. Okay, good. And those are the questions we've had. Those are the questions we had sent in. And I think you both were able to touch very, very eloquently on all of them. And so as we wrap up, I would just like to ask one question for both of you. What is one thing you both think, or what is one thing you think every payroll leader should do this quarter? Like in terms of going forward, what is that one thing that you suggest every payroll leader should be doing?
Yeah, in terms of a practical recommendation, make that link in your mind immediately between your payroll data and your retention data. So immediately connect the two of those in your head and say, okay, well, if we are looking at a particular instance where an employee has left, was there a signal contained in their payroll data at any point? So were there errors? Were there unresolved queries? How long did they have to wait to get a response for resolved queries? So just make sure that you're making that connection. And then when you can connect it, you then have a business case to take to your CFO for whatever infrastructure investment the company may have been putting off, because you can then say to them, well, look, this is ultimately what it is costing us in this respect, and this is the previously unforeseen impact down the line. So just make that connection between payroll and retention.
For me, honestly, it starts with my payroll journey from before. I've been in the payroll world now for 7 years, rooted in compliance. I think a lot of us that are watching this video, we think to ourselves that we didn't choose payroll chose us. And in the terms of compliance, like it really is like timeliness of action and making sure that you are set up for success. What does that mean? It means reviewing your employee elections and setups, engaging those TPA requests, third-party access requests for your state tax accounts, responding to those questionnaires to register for your state taxes, really just focusing on having visibility into these items. And with anything with compliance, like the cost of fixing it reactively is always higher. So taking that time to just focus on this now, it will pay off in dividends in the long run.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Well, it's been a very, very interesting discussion we've had. Your questions have also made it very more engaging. And in closing, I would like to say payroll accuracy, as we've seen and as we've discussed, is a very, very important retention lever. It is very important. And that's the arguments we've made today. And the data actually backs it up, right? I started by mentioning that number, 64%. The data just does show that 64% of US employees will leave if their pay concerns remain or went unaddressed, right? And it is the companies that take that number seriously and build the infrastructure to act on it that will actually not be filling those seats again, because they will keep their people. And Barry and John have, talked about different instances, how the world is changing, things you need to do to keep ahead of those things. It is by taking those things serious, even from now, that you will keep your people and also attract the best people. All of the data that we've cited here, all the numbers, all of those things are available in our 2026 State of Global Payroll Report. You can download it, you can look through it, and don't just read it as information. It is very important you take that information and then act on it. John, Barry, it's been a pleasure. Thank you both for being a part of this discussion. Hopefully we get to do this again some other time, but it's been a pleasure having you both.
Thank you both.
Pleasure, Calvin. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining. Take care. Bye.